When you find yourself not getting the results you want, and then you find your mind coming up with solutions and blaming and externalizing why we are where we are. I think great leaders, they look within and they say, oh shit, how are we a part of the problem here? Oh, we have a partner policy that was developed in 2006 and it's totally outdated. Oh, we haven't trained these people literally on what their job is now. Right. And so, oftentimes when we're not getting, and that's why I love that Deming quote, because it's so harsh and our minds want to come up with reasons external to us being part of it.
Welcome to Adapt or Die, the podcast where leaders share real life stories behind their biggest pivots. I'm Andreas Pedersen, the former tech CEO executive that turned into a coach and the founder of Leaders Adapt. Today's guest is Scott Allen, award-winning educator, leadership expert, and the host of Practical Wisdom for Leaders, a top-ranked podcast globally. Welcome so much to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's good to be here. I'm excited for the conversation today.
We are going to go very fast. There are going to be a lot of leadership discussions and hopefully a few amazing nuggets for our listeners. Let's dive straight into it. One of the first questions I have here is, in your extensive work, what's the most common blind spot you see in leaders when faced with organizational disruption?
Well, okay, so that's a great place to start. It's a great place to start because it's baked in, right? That there's so much happening in the external environment and shifts, we could call them, whether they're geopolitical shifts, digitization, generational shifts with Gen Alpha now coming online and Gen Zs and millennials and Gen Xers and multiple generations in the workforce. We have all of these shifts that are occurring. So that's kind of the external reality. And so I love the title of the podcast because adaptation, that's the work. And there's actually a theory of leadership called adaptive leadership, developed by a gentleman named Ron Heifetz at Harvard, the Kennedy School. And it's one of my favorite kind of ways of thinking about leadership. And so I think one common thing that I can think that is a big challenge is just how someone constructs what it means to lead in the first place. So if I'm an individual who constructs the role of leader as the person who has the answers, the person who decides the path forward, the person who charts the course alone, I think that's a recipe for trouble in a big, big way. Before we started recording, we were talking about a post I did today on LinkedIn about strategic vulnerability. A friend of mine, Alexis, wrote an article. She's in Australia for Fast Company. She talks about strategic vulnerability because we need others desperately. And I think leaders at this level, and you know this better than anyone, I mean, having built organizations yourself, I think for me, leadership, at times it might be about having the right answers, but I think at times it's about elevating the right questions. As you are engaging in leadership, you went to bed every night with a thousand questions. And in my mind, I think at this level, especially when we're dealing with complexity, where there's no one we can call in the world to say, hey, I got this going on. What are the 4 steps? How do I fix this? That doesn't exist. That person doesn't exist. So when we're dealing with complexity, I think leadership is about elevating the right questions. So we're not working on number 77 of 1,000. We're working on 1, 2, and 3, right? The most important questions. And then creating a place of psychological safety where the team can kind of put the problem in the center of the table, have the knockdown drag out, and really, really explore what we're up against. And then ultimately what we're doing is we're experimenting. Because there's no one we can call, because we are in complexity, we are coming up with what we think is our best guess. Now, if I have a diverse team, and when I say diverse team, I mean thinking styles, background, expertise. I mean, if I have a diverse team that has done its best to identify our path forward, then that's, for me, leadership, creating that space where we can really, really, as a team and as a group. So my ideas might not be elevated, but Bezos has this famous line. because again, he knows that in complexity there isn't an answer. But he has this famous line where I think it was something like, I disagree, but I'll support you, right? And I don't think this is the right path forward, but I also don't know. All of you think that it is. So I don't think this is the right answer, but I'm going to support you, because ultimately we have to have that level of vulnerability and that humility that, you know what? There is no answer right now. It's just what we think is our best path forward. So that's a mistake I see people make. They construct leadership as I'm the person who has to have the answers. Oof, recipe for failure. And then if they're an individual who does value asking questions, great. But if they're not creating that space where people feel like they can bring their voice to the table, then that's a mistake. And they're literally flying blind. And you've been in those meetings. You've been in those meetings where everyone, you could tell, you just knew people around the table disagreed with the path we were going down. And we talked about it at the water cooler afterwards, but no one said it in the meeting. And that's death in my mind, especially when it comes to this change, adaptation, etc. You're literally flying blind if that's what you have going on. So I'll stop there.
So
You can
much
tell I get
gold.
excited about this.
And there are like 5 podcast episodes we can go down on and discuss separate here. I just want to highlight a couple of things that I think are extremely important for any leader listening to this. Creating a psychological safety for your employees to be great. Safe people who feel safe and secure, they dare to be great. They dare to speak up, and they dare to go against where others might not think you should be going. And that's where the real gold is. The other thing you mentioned here is being a leader who doesn't have to be the person who calls the shot. And then concentrated effort yields concentrated results. Like we can go in, but I want to start with this.
Yeah.
Why is psychological safety so important? And what happens if you don't create it? And how do you actually create it?
Okay, so Amy Edmondson, right? We're riding on her shoulders here. She's at Harvard in the College of Business, and she wrote a book called The Fearless Organization.
Mhm.
So check out, for listeners, if you're interested in this topic, please, please, please check out her work. So psychological safety means nothing more than if people feel comfortable sharing what might seem like a silly idea, what might seem like a little bit of a random idea, what might seem like not the norm, but they feel comfortable moving that into this to kind of the dialogue, extroverting that. They won't look stupid if they bring something up. So what this requires of the leader is the leader has to really go through the process of how are we going to create norms of how we problem solve as an organization. And again, I'm going to go back to Bezos because I think he did a really, really wonderful job of codifying how they worked problems at Amazon, whether it was the memo that really outlines the process, whether it was the rule where they get into the room and they all read that memo for about
Mhm.
15 minutes in quiet. So everyone's mind is in a similar place. We're not assuming people have read it walking in. No, we're all in the same space. And then oftentimes he would limit the size of the team. So it's the two pizza rule. And so we don't have 30 people in the room. We have the right people in the room. And then oftentimes he would say, "Look, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch the dialogue, and I'm not going to jump in and drive the conversation. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to listen to their conversation," because he didn't want to bias it. And again, he would at times also have the role. He also had these kind of decision rules about, is this something we can't come back from, or is this going to be a small pilot that we can come back from? So there were different types of problems that they were working with as well. So we've got norms. I don't care what they are, but they're norms that everyone understands, everyone has agreed to, and the leader can regulate themselves. Oftentimes, again, the leader might take over. The leader might think that the answer is marketing and just go really deep and drive the group towards marketing. And then everyone's afraid to say, Jim, I don't think it's marketing. I think it's this, right? So the leader has to create the space where he or she can be wrong, he or she can be challenged, he or she can be the individual whose idea isn't adopted by the group. And I need to feel comfortable saying, you know what, Jim, I don't think that's the right path forward. If we go there, I'll support it, but I don't think that's the solution. or I feel very comfortable saying, I hope we also consider this. And then I know that that is going to be given the time it deserves. So the leader, to your point, has to give up a little bit. But I think what you gain is incredible wisdom from the group, especially if you have really talented people around the table. But we have to have some norms about how we're going to communicate, how we're going to problem solve. Everyone has to understand those norms, be committed to those norms. And then the leader has to be able to regulate themselves in that process and hold themselves accountable to following that process as well. Now, one norm might be, look, in the end, I might have to make decisions that you all disagree with, and I understand that. But I always want to hear your opinion, and you always have permission to challenge my thinking, challenge my ideas.
I
Well,
love that.
okay. So it's about creating that space, then actually following through behaviorally as the leader with that. Because again, you know what it feels like to be in a room with a leader who has said all the right things, but then their behavior shuts everything down, right? So the leader has to regulate and has to almost have a system where people feel comfortable saying, look, Scott, you're shutting down dialogue here.
I've
And that's
seen
hard.
this. I've seen this happen so many times.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to words like blame around a failure, when it comes to not admitting fault, when it comes to not taking ownership for something the team might have screwed up, but the leader actually stepping in and saying, you know what? In the end of the day, it's my responsibility. So they don't blame anyone, but they have the mindset of what can we learn and celebrate
Yes.
the failures instead. But
Yes.
Scott, how much so let's pretend that we have a leader that lived this way, operates this way, and then you scale up an organization. And now the leader, that person might not be in the room. How do you build a leadership culture so the leader one day can operate without being in the room, yet this is sustained, this behavior?
Well, I think that's in many ways the really core question. How do we codify this? That in and of itself is a complex adaptive challenge. That question
Mhm.
right there that you just said, and no one in the world has the answer for what that means at organization X in Orange County, California. What I would say is that the leader might ask that question of the team because that's important. That's critical. What are our lockstep decision making processes? What are our norms about how we make decisions? And how are we going to codify that at different levels in the organization? So maybe again, Amazon has the no PowerPoint rule. Like, we're not going to do PowerPoints. We're always going to have a memo. This is how we make decisions. So, do I get my senior team in a room? Do we come to a consensus? And literally, again, it's not, you know, people walk out committed because, again, I have set the table. They have ownership. We've all co-created this, and that's an important word. We've co-created this, and then we are walking out of that room committed to cascading that, waterfalling that into the organization. And then I think an important thing is that we are now also following up a month later, 2 months later. How's it working? Is it working? What do we need to shift? What do we need to adjust? Is it actually anchoring into the culture? If it's not anchoring into the culture, then that's another question. Okay, I don't think this is anchored into the culture yet. What are we going to do? What are we going to experiment with? What are we going to try? Again, in these complex adaptive challenges, oftentimes you're just in the realm of experimentation. So if I 3 months in notice that it's not anchored, that's another question for the team to work. Look, it's not happening. What are we going to do to make sure this is happening and it truly is anchored? And then I think we as leaders have to be open. Well, teams feel this, this, and this. Right? You see
Mhm.
this sometimes with like agile implementation, where that just cookie cutter black and white process may or may not totally fit our culture. In fact, it can be a little bit of a roadblock at times. So, are we then open to feedback, adjustments, shifts, and then making those shifts in real time as we get kind of data as to what is the quote? I forget the quote. It might have been a German military strategist who said something to the effect of, You know, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Oh, that's good.
So you can look it up. We can Google it. It's if you type that, you'll find the gentleman. But we have to also just have the realization that our pretty plan that we've designed in this boardroom likely won't survive contact with reality. So we then
Correct.
have to be open about how are we going to shift this, adjust this, tweak this, and then really living into a place where this does become ours. And I think Amazon had that. I think, at least from all accounts, and the people I know who work at Amazon, that took a lot of experimentation, a lot of tweaking, and I think they got to a place that was pretty solid, much further along than a lot of other organizations that I've worked with. And I haven't worked with Amazon, so I don't mean to say it that way. But most of the time when I walk into an organization, there's no norms around how we're going to debate. There's no norms about how we're going to behave. That just doesn't exist. It's just people get on the Teams call and it kind of goes. And that's not the best.
No. So I want to highlight for listeners here a couple of key concepts. First of all, change is constant. It's always going to happen. You can't just go in and think you're going to change one and it's done. The second thing is you have to constantly in that process be inspecting and adapting. And that's not just changing yourself and the top leadership. You have to make sure that it's ingrained into the culture. One question that I'm really sitting here and wondering about, and the reason for this question is the following. I think many people have heard how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
But if we have any of the listeners right now sitting and thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me, and here is why. So, what if the opposite was true of what we just said? How can people identify if they have an organization that isn't tuned into change, that isn't adapting, that have a blame culture, all these things? Like, if you are a listener to this podcast, this episode, what are some of the key markers that should at least pop up in your head? Like, okay, here's a red flag. Maybe I should look into that.
Okay. So, one of my absolute favorite quotes is by Deming. And, when it comes to organizational life, Deming said every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So that's an interesting quote. It's an awesome quote when things are going like we want them to. It's a harsh quote when we're not getting the results we want. But the system, it's yielding certain results. That might
Mhm.
be our system around retention of employees, recruiting best in class Gen Zs. That might be our market share. The system is yielding certain results right now. So, what are we going to do? And so for me, I think a very, very important thing when it comes to leadership is confronting those brutal facts that maybe the system isn't yielding the results we want right now. And I think our minds in this moment, if we're not good as a leader, we can suffer from all kinds of cognitive biases that kind of excuse away some of those results. And so, for instance, self-serving bias. I do a lot of work in organizations like construction or manufacturing, and my mind will literally blame a whole generation of let's say Gen Zs. My mind will say, "Oh, Gen Zs, they suck. They're terrible. There's no good ones out there. We can't find them. They're horrible. Hate working with them. Gen Zs. Ugh."
That's a
And
warning bell that you're not changing and adapting
yes.
because now you're like that. As soon as someone, anyway, keep going.
No,
What?
no, yes,
I,
100%. But again, I hear it all the time where we're not getting the results we want with recruiting great Gen Zs. And, we can't see what we own in that
Mhm.
failure. We can't see what we own in not creating an environment where they want to build a career in our organization. So it could be an accounting firm or a law firm that has a partner structure that was built in 1967 or 1978 or a totally different time, like 100% different time. And it's built for a workforce that had a whole bunch of different assumptions about what it meant to work than Gen Zs or millennials. It's built for a workforce that today is very unrealistic when you look at what they value. And again, we can't see that we have a system in place and a structure in place that's yielding certain results. And we need to own the fact that we probably need to tweak, adjust, shift, and upgrade. So, you talk about upskilling, you could talk about upculturing. Are we kind of updating the software, right? It's almost like you're running DOS and it's 2025. You're not going to get too far.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, once we have the results and the data, oh gosh, millennials don't want to be partners. They don't want to kill themselves like they used to become a partner. Gosh, millennials are terrible. Okay, you can look at it that way. You could also look at the fact that maybe your organization was built on an assumption of free labor for, for years, and the current model doesn't yield that. So what are you going to do? What are you going to shift? How are you going to adjust? And I think our minds can trick us when we're not getting the results we want. So we have to have that humility where when we're not getting the results we want, are we looking within first? Can I tell you one other quick story?
Absolutely. I just want to point out what I think you're also saying here, and I want to extrapolate on this because this is a
Yeah.
super important topic. First, if you have leaders in your organization, I just want to recap. If you have
Yeah.
leaders in your organization that are saying we cannot find any good Gen Zs or millennials, they're not the problem. You're the problem. First red flag. The
Yes.
second red flag, if I understand you correctly, and please correct me here, are leaders craving stability and predictability, and therefore they're not able to look for these required changes? Or what is sort of the root cause? Because it's not just a generational thing and the core culture. Like, what is it? Like, yeah. But I would like, where were you going with the other story?
Yes. I mean, okay, let me tell the other story and then I'm going to see if I can come back to that.
Yeah,
Okay. And hold me accountable if I
I will
don't.
try.
Okay. So I'm working with a construction firm and they're struggling with millennial managers and they're kind of
Hmm.
complaining about millennial managers aren't what we're looking for. Millennial managers, it wasn't enough just to beg on millennials in the first place. Now we're blaming whole generations of millennial managers. And so I kind of looked at them and I said, it seems to me that what we're asking of these individuals, these foremen, these individuals who are in positions of authority, who used to be a carpenter, right, or an
Hmm.
electrician, I said, look, it seems to me that their job, not beyond the functional expertise that they have, is conflict management, problem solving, negotiation, and building relationships like really quickly with all of these different people that they need to have relationships with. And I said, is that kind of accurate? Is that kind of their job? And they were like, yeah, that's it. And I said, well, what are we doing to train them on those four elements that are like critical, that like literally they have to be heat-seeking missiles at problem solving, negotiation, conflict management, and building relationships?
Leadership fundamentals.
Zero. They were doing zero to prepare these individuals to be successful in this totally new job that they were now doing. And I don't blame those leaders necessarily. That's just kind of what they've grown up with. That's been the culture of construction for years. But the game has changed. I can't just sit there and bark orders to a workforce that is plentiful, where there's a line to get a job and they're thankful to have a job, and just be dictatorial in my approach to leadership. Gen Zs, millennials, they won't put up with that. So we need to put people in positions of authority who are like good, who are really good and skilled at building relationships, conflict management, like getting in and out of difficult conversations, negotiation, and problem solving. The game's changed. And whether that's HR law or just the scope of kind of what's required to be in a position of leadership. Well, those leaders couldn't see that they owned part of the problem. Their minds just blamed millennial managers. So I think for listeners, when you find yourself not getting the results you want, and then you find your mind coming up with solutions and blaming and externalizing why we are where we are, I think great leaders, they look within and they say, oh shit, how are we a part of the problem here? Oh, we have a partner policy that was developed in 2006 and it's totally outdated. Oh, we haven't trained these people literally on what their job is now. Right. And so, oftentimes when we're not getting, and that's why I love that Deming quote, because it's so harsh and our minds want to come up with reasons external to us being part of the blame. Our minds want to do that desperately. We don't want to have to be failures. So our minds play tricks on us. Again, just look up self-serving bias.
How do you recognize it and how do you break free from it?
You have to, as a leader, walk in. There is a fundamental rule in your mind that I do not see everything. I can't see everything. And you have to have a level of humility that I need the team. I need this team. And especially if it's the right people that we've put in place, I need these other minds because I'm missing things left and right. I am it's called a conceptual block. I am a victim to all kinds of rules that are running around in my head that are kind of creating a reality that oftentimes isn't real. And I think I sound a little kind of maybe academic there. So I'm going to try and think of an example. But again, the rule of we don't train managers or supervisors or foremen on conflict management, negotiation, relationship building, and problem solving. That's just a rule those leaders had in their head. It was subconscious. They weren't even aware it was there.
Mhm.
That's just how it had always been in the organization. But when you're not getting the results you want, that's a flag. Huh. Okay. Huh. We aren't where we need to be. What am I missing? What are we missing? And again, are you the leader who's bringing those questions to the team? You all were missing something. There's something we don't have the right kind of, we don't have the right path forward right now. We're not getting the results we want. What do we need to tweak, adjust, and experiment with to see if we can get new results? You're a parent, okay?
Mhm.
You're a parent. You and your wife, me and my wife and I spend a lot of time on walks talking about the children and brainstorming adjustments, tweaks, shifts we can make to yield new results with our kids. We're not getting the results we want. Will isn't preparing for the SAT how we want him to. What are we going to try next? Well, there's no one we can call in the world. Hey, I got Will here. He's not putting in the time for the SAT we think he should be. What do we do? There's no one that has that answer. It's me and my wife going on a walk, having a conversation, and then having the humility, both of us, to know that neither one of us have the answer. It's just what is our next best guess? We both feel like we can have and bring our full selves to that conversation. And who cares who idea wins? It's we want to win. We want to influence him to move to a different place. So whether it's parenting, whether it's organizational life, whether it's a sports team and you're the coach coaching little league, I think you're in that space of experimentation. When leaders don't have that mindset, they're vulnerable to failure, more vulnerable to failure, I believe. You have a better shot if you have the full team. So here's one final thing that I want to say about this topic. Because you're working in the gray, because it's no one has the answer, do you have a team of thinking partners who can hold you accountable, who will help you make sense, who will help you think through some of these things? And again, that could be your team, are the thinking partners. I think in my life, I have a therapist, I have a mentor, I have my wife. I have other people where for certain topics I turn
In
to
the
them.
reverse order of importance, why first?
Yes. Very good, very good. But you know what I mean? Like, do you have a group of thinking partners who you can go to help you make sense of what's swirling on around you?
Mhm.
Because the stress and the pace that can all take you and get you off kilter and take over. And before you know it, we're focusing on the wrong things. I'm locked down and stressed out and curt with my team, not creating the right environment, and it's a recipe for disaster. So I'll stop.
You're
You can
you're
tell I
dropping
love this
so much
conversation,
gold.
right?
I'm going to point out a few things here for the listeners because I think it's so important. One, as a leader of any organization, go seek a peer group, go seek a
Yes.
network, go seek a therapist, a mentor, an advisor. It doesn't
Yes.
matter. I would never have achieved what I have without it. And my game
Foundational.
plan in life is, and the reason why I'm doing this podcast, I am learning from other people, so I don't have to live it myself. Today, I'm learning from Scott. What's going to happen? Scott is going to have a full life of experience. I don't have to live that full life myself. I don't have time for that. I want to die having 1,000 years experience.
I love it. I love that.
The second thing I think I want to point out that you highlighted here is the word, you didn't say the word, but I'm going to add it. I think curiosity.
Oh gosh.
Curiosity is so freaking powerful. And you talk about
Yes.
that. And if you combine curiosity with vulnerability, when you told the story about what you do with your wife, and by the way, parenting is the best leadership training you can do,
Yes.
or one of the better ones. But what I was, because talk about, regardless of generation, talk about someone who will fight back on you. But anyway,
Yes.
you will learn conflict management. But what I wanted to point out here is Scott is highlighting the extreme importance to be mature enough from an emotional intelligence perspective to understand that you don't have all the answers,
Yes.
and you got to be curious to figure out the answer. And the
Yes.
third thing, and I'm going to use my words now, Scott. Sorry for just doing the quick recap, but I
Love it.
think you
No, I
dropped
love it.
gold. Is I think any leader needs these questions, these mantras to go, am I stuck in my behavior? What can I do differently? And
Yeah.
I'm going to quote one of my mentors who always says that the brain dies twice. First is when you think you have the answers to everything, and the second time is when your heart stops beating. The
Yep.
best leaders time them in the same second. And what
Mm,
that means, you died curious. You died
yes.
trying to understand the other person's perception. And one of my favorite mantras, Scott, is when I'm so sure of something, I ask myself, what if the opposite is true?
Mm,
And now I logically have to come up with counter arguments on something I'm
yes.
so sure I'm right on. So you
Yes.
dropped gold there. I just wanted to sum it up because I think it was so freaking good. And I really hope that the listeners understand the value of what Scott is telling us here.
And real quick, there's a process here. And like you, I am so curious about this puzzle of what
Mhm.
is that process. But there's like a baseline. I have a habit of mind that understands that I don't have the answers. There's a level of humility and there's a level of vulnerability. That's just foundational. When I'm not getting the results I want, that Deming quote, I'm going to curiosity. My
Mhm.
mind wants to go to blame. My mind wants to make me not own any part of this, but I know that that's the case. And so
Mhm.
I need to own a part of it. So my mind goes to that place of curiosity and that growth mindset. We're not there yet. So again, another incredible book for listeners. If you haven't read it, Mindset, Carol Dweck, staying in that place of possibilities. And yet that's critical. I then bring those questions, the most important ones, not number 144. You've sat in the meeting where you were like, this is what we're talking about right now. Like shit's burning down all around us, and you want to spend our hour talking about this? No, you're talking about the most important questions, creating that place for psychological safety. You have a team of people whose minds themselves may want to go to a fixed mindset or self-serving bias and blame everything else. No, 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 no. We, as a norm, stay in a place of possibilities, curiosity, growth mindset. And what are we going to do next? And so then you create that space where you then have that discussion, have the knockdown drag out, come up with what we think are our best 4 or 5 paths forward, run the experiment, fail or win, learn, get new data, rinse and repeat, right? Just
Listeners,
a
clip the
never,
last minute there. Seriously, put that on repeat a few times.
right? I mean, it seems to me that those are some of the, of course, it's not everything, but those are some of the big pieces of kind of how we win when it comes to that adaptation, navigating change. Because again, to your point, it's a cliche, but I think navigating change is the jam. That's the gig when it comes
Mhm.
to leadership. Building teams, high functioning teams, solving puzzles, and what worked yesterday will not work tomorrow. So what are we going to shift, and are we going to up culture and upskill and upgrade and adjust given the new circumstances? COVID, large language models, and ChatGPT entering the scene. Whatever it is, geopolitical, tariffs, I don't care what it is. That will be ever present. And in that work, we have to stay alert.
Love it. Okay, people follow this formula. The gold you just dropped. What's the guarantee? What's the promise? How does success look for these leaders now that have done this journey repeatedly, and now Like, tell me, how do they feel? How does the team feel? How does this impact the business result? And what sort of that next chapter that comes from this mindset and these processes?
I think back to use your word, because it's one of my favorite words. Like intentionality is one of my favorite words, and then curiosity. I think it keeps your career lives in curiosity
Hmm.
because everything around us is changing. And some of the time we're getting the results we want, and some of the time we're not. So, am I curious about that? And am I good enough to move the needle to stay ahead of the curve or to adjust to the curve? That's a career spent in curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great place to live. And I think it's also a great place to engage. If I'm not in that space, I'm just in the space where a person's barking orders or my voice isn't heard when I contribute something in a meeting. I'll probably exit that environment pretty quickly, or as quickly as I can.
So
Yeah.
important. I want to underline this. If your employees are not challenged and they are stagnant and they are not growing, they're
Yep.
going to feel how you feel when you're in that situation. So you
Yes.
constantly have to create that. I think change is good. It's just that it's loaded word. And I think whenever change happens to me, it's positive. I'm like, ooh, I'm excited for what to come. Ooh. But most leaders don't think that way, and they fail their teams, and the teams leave. And especially, I mean, I don't know about you, Scott, but when I worked with some founders, I'm like, I have a retention problem with my employees. I'm like, okay, walk me through how you handle change, how you handle disruption. And they're seeking constant predictability. We need to grow 5% because that's what the board told me to do. It's like, yeah, no shit. Your employees are not challenged anymore. They're not growing. Growing people create growing organizations, and the opposite is also true. That's just the way it is.
I mean, you just made me kind of think about something, but it's almost like the gamification of work. It's like, okay, here's the next puzzle.
Yeah.
We've kicked the shit out of these puzzles, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. You all as a team, we're killing it. Here's a level 5 puzzle. And if you're keeping the team and you're keeping the organization in that place of curiosity and growth, I think again, you can use your leadership as a way to keep people in that space. It can shut down that curiosity, or it can open up the doors and unleash that energy for
Hmm.
curiosity. And it matters greatly because you know what it feels like when you work for a leader who shuts down, and you know what it feels like to work for a leader who kind of opens up that space. And oof, I mean, and you're doing this right now. Like, how do I increase my listenership in the podcast? I have a newsletter. How do I increase the followers in the newsletter or followers on LinkedIn? Um, Again, back to parenting. These puzzles are all around us. If we choose, because I hear parents say all the time, "Oh, they're a teenager, so there's nothing we can do." Well, that's a fixed mindset. There's all kinds of things you can do,
Of course you
right?
could do. You can do a lot of
Get
things. Like that's the
curious.
thing. You
Get
can
curious.
always do something. Never
Yes.
play the victim mentality and give up. Like it's the
Yeah.
opposite.
But it kind of I think for some leaders, it psychologically takes them off the hook. They
Hmm.
no longer have to work the puzzle. If they tell themselves that, well, Gen Zs, there's nothing you can do, or if they tell themselves, these
Again, red flag.
stories. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. It's fun.
Let's go into the lightning round. I'll ask you a couple of quick questions. First thing that comes to your mind, short answers. A leader you admire for their adaptability.
Okay. I'm going to go with the former manager of the Cleveland Guardians baseball team. Okay. This is an individual who came from Boston, the Red Sox, Terry Francona. And it's almost a Moneyball-esque type story where you have an individual who's come from a very, very wealthy team and come to a team where he has a fraction of the payroll. And I think it was like last fall where the Guardians were playing the Yankees, and literally Aaron Judge is the payroll of the whole team of the Cleveland Guardians, right? I mean, it's just a David and Goliath.
Hmm.
Yet you have a manager who spent years, years and years working the puzzle, stay in a place of curiosity. How do I win when we have very, very few resources? So literally any leader with that mindset, I just gravitate to. You have a John Wooden who was a basketball coach at UCLA, won 10 plus national championships. Over that decade, a lot changed, a lot shifted. So he had some fundamentals that were tried and true for him as a coach, but he also adjusted and shifted his approach. So those are a couple people that just kind of come to mind for me that I just have great respect for.
One book that every leader should read.
Mindset by Carol Dweck. Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's fundamental to the operating system. It'll fundamentally shift how you think about parenting, how you think about leadership and management, how you think about life. So, mindset is, for me, it's one of the first books I have an individual read. Because again, Francona or Wooden, they had a mindset of adaptability, curiosity. They were fascinated by the puzzles. And always stayed in a place of possibilities, even given some of the constraints that they had. You work with a lot of startup founders, same thing, right? A lot of constraints. How do we get creative in that box of those constraints?
Finish the sentence. Real leadership happens when.
I love this question. I think real leadership happens when we are vulnerable, humble, curious, intentional, and consistent.
Poof. So good. So good. Thank you so much. This was like an amazing conversation, Scott. And for any of the listeners out there, I think go back and listen to this one and go make sure you go follow Scott on LinkedIn and subscribe to his newsletter. Who else should be reaching out to you, Scott? And what is sort of your superpower that you offer people?
Sure. So I spend a lot of my time keynotes and workshops. I mean, that's what I love. I love engaging in conversations like this with individuals who are doing the work today and now. And so, I mean, I think you could tell I love this conversation. I just do. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by founders, fascinated by anyone who's raised their hand and stepped into the arena and said, you know what, I want to lead. And so, yeah, keynotes, workshops, LinkedIn, newsletter. I have an endless kind of well for curiosity around this topic. Really, how do we better prepare people to be successful when serving in these really challenging roles? It's just, I'm fascinated by it.
Absolutely been one of my favorite episodes I've done for Adapt or Die so far. Scott, thank you again so much for joining. Thank you for listening to Adapt or Die. Uh, if today's conversation helped you think differently or that you have a question about the show, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm at Andreas, the CEO. Then also, please go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star rating. Just search for Adapt or Die. By doing so, you help me, and you also help a ton of other leaders out there who won't make the mistakes that I have made and the guests have made. And please remember, in leadership, we adapt and thrive, or we don't survive. Until next time.